All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're going to give it about a minute before we get kicked off to make sure everybody has an opportunity to get on, get their audio working, and then get to hear my lovely voice and hopefully not my dogs in the background. Thanks for joining us this morning. All right, thanks everyone. Welcome to a Splunk Tech Talk on security. We'll be getting forward with the agenda here in just a moment. I do want to have a couple highlighted housekeeping items. First up, everyone's muted and the session is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be made available to all attendees following our time here together. The platform does have a Q&A tool. Please make use of that and we will address questions as we can, both live and in the chat. The video replay is going to be available on the Splunk Community Tech Talks. And with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's go ahead and dig into our time and topic together. We are discussing Enterprise Security 8, the essential upgrade for threat detection, investigation, and response. We will say TDIR a lot throughout our time together. Do need to highlight our forward-looking statement slide. We're going to be talking a lot about things that are in the product and available for you as customers today. There may be something I accidentally say in this conversation that is a forward-looking statement. And if you are in the business of making purchase decisions, you need to make sure and validate that that was something that was actually available and not something in the future. I am your primary speaker and host for today. My name is Drew Church, and I am a global security product specialist. I am joined by my partner in crime, Brandon Tansey, who is another one of these lovely alphabet acronym titles. And he'll be chiming in and helping me deliver content and answering some Q&A throughout our time together. Let's go ahead and dive into our topics for our session today. I'm going to highlight some notable, hopefully that's a joke to some of you, changes between Enterprise Security 7 and 8, with a focus on the terminology and taxonomy of what entails in that change. We're going to be talking about the Enterprise Security key benefits and features to kind of level set and explain some of the things that we've been doing, both from when Enterprise Security 8 went generally available over a year ago and to what is available today in our latest releases. I'm going to be talking just a little bit about Enterprise Security Editions, because especially as you're reviewing documentation and other things, talking to your account teams and customer success partners, you're going to hear about ES Essentials, you're going to hear about ES Premier, and I want you to have a fundamental understanding of what that is so that those documentations and materials make sense to you. Where we're going to spend the majority of our time is going to be around the important considerations about as you move into the Enterprise Security 8 world, things like deprecated features and from previous versions of Enterprise Security, known issues, some architectural nuances, and then also talking about the REST API available in Enterprise Security 8. First up, those notable changes and our terminology. First up, I want to just kind of talk about, you are probably, as practitioners and users of enterprise security, very familiar with things like correlation searches, correlations, risk incident rule, notable, all of this stuff. And so those are the words that we've been using in Enterprise Security 7 and many previous versions for a very long time. As a part of the build out of Enterprise Security 8 and talking with our customers and our partners, this desire for a common taxonomy really became apparent. Splunk, in partnership with some other leading technology vendors, has helped create the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, or OCSF. And a lot of what you see inside of Enterprise Security 8 uses terms coming from OCSF. So for example, correlation searches and those risk rules are now called event-based detections. Those risk-based alerting or RBA risk incident rules are finding-based detections. Those things that we used to call notable events are now called findings. The comments that you would put on a notable event are now called notes, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot of these nuances, and it's throughout the product. I'm going to be using a lot of these ES8 terms. So you definitely want to get familiar. And there is a wonderful cheat sheet in the docs that will be linked and available in your slides after the presentation. Some other key ones I would highlight, incident review from the navigation right where we go to review our queue of notable events is now called the analyst queue. Some folks also call it mission control because we combine the mission control standalone app that many of you may be familiar with, as well as the incident review, and called that the mission control analyst queue. The incident details page that if you were MC standalone customer, is now called the investigation details page. Some things you also are probably familiar with, depending on your level of familiar with things like Splunk SOAR, formerly known as Phantom. Response plans and response templates are now solidified under that term of response plans. And there's some other ones on the slide there. All right, looking forward and kind of setting our expectations about what we're trying to achieve and what we have been doing with our releases of Enterprise Security 8 and in the futures, right? Reimagining the SOC, right? Where we are putting together, and I apologize, there's a little artifact on the slide here that wasn't in there in the PowerPoint that we uploaded. I do apologize for that. The unified TDIR, right? So that threat detection, investigation, response is at the center of this, right? And that is that key center of the AI-powered SOC platform. Outside of that ring, right, are all of these specific use cases and capabilities that you have gotten accustomed to from Splunk Enterprise Security, from other security offerings in the Splunk platform, right? So those kind of like, hey, I need to monitor the security posture of my organization. I need to get threat detection and have those contexts available to us, right? How can I perform world-class threat hunting and investigation? How can I bring in threat intelligence to add additional context and enrich what I'm doing in my investigations and so on and so forth, right? We continue to do that, and now we're bringing that all together in a single spot. Some things that are really important to understand about Enterprise Security 8 are where a lot of our customers were using the incident review page. They weren't always working their cases out of it. They had additional needs. They need a little bit more kind of that workflow. And that's a lot of the case management capability that we're going to be talking through today, really front and center. There are other things that we're doing to really realize that outcome of having the single pane of glass, that single solution for all of these use cases. A lot of work has gone into things like detection management and helping our detection engineers have a much better experience as they configure event-based and finding-based detections, the integration of orchestration automation natively within the tooling. And so what does that look like, right? We have that visibility, that single pane of glass as we're performing those investigations, right? We want to deliver that world-class analyst experience and all the tooling and connective tissue from across the Splunk and your third-party technology stack tooling. And then really make sure that we're accelerating the SOC and trying to build in AI and agentic tools into all parts of that workflow to make everything a little bit easier and faster for everyone. Some of the things that we've done as a part of the Enterprise Security 8 and Editions journey up to this point, we want to make sure that we're continuing to support the ability to ingest, federate, and normalize data from every source, whether it's cloud, on-prem, OT, IT. We want to have it all and make it available to you as a security business. Continue around data filtering and routing and all that stuff that you're very familiar with from a platform perspective. We've integrated Cisco Talos with the Splunk Intelligence or Splunk Threat Intelligence Management tool, as well as the capability of enriching detection or enriching findings with threat intelligence coming from Cisco Talos. Detections are front and center. I'm really excited to talk a lot about that. Detection Studio is one of the things that you'll probably have heard about, especially if you were listening to any of the keynotes at .conf or happened to attend in some of our sessions at .conf 25 in Boston just a few weeks ago. Detection Studio is where we're really focusing on that detection engineer, making sure that they have the ability to deploy, test, and monitor those detections much faster. And we're continuing to put risk front and center with finding-based detections. We'll talk more about FBDs, making RBA accessible to more and more folks. From an analyst perspective, we really want that end-to-end workflow where we're bringing together SIEM, SOAR, and UEBA coming in very here shortly. We also want to make sure that the experience for automation powered by Splunk SOAR is integrated into the analyst investigation experience, and it's not a separate tool or anything of that, right? It is in there. The inputs and outputs are right there for use in those workflows. And then as we're continuing to release and UEBAs and controlled availability, right, having that anomaly detection and insider threat use cases, making that a little bit easier. Some other things I think you probably have heard about from an announcements perspective, right? We want to provide those AI assistants and agents across the platform, right? Helping generate things like SPL queries, generate case summaries. We want triage agents to kind of give you that first pass of like, hey, what's going on? And is this something I should be prioritizing? How can I explain this alert? And then really, and this is where Brandon is a key partner across the business for me, right, is really digging into automation and response, where how can we make playbooks faster and better? And what can we do from a response perspective? Can we bring agentic capability to that and make those response actions when they're safe to do so much quicker? All right, as I promised, we're going to be talking a little bit about additions. Enterprise security, you have been thinking about that as enterprise security, right? And you've purchased and used enterprise security, and now we are moving into this world of additions. When we think about how we design, build, and talk about software and capability to our customers, we use the phrase use cases a lot. And so the use cases you see on the left are probably something that you're familiar with, part of your job, part of the things that you do on a day in and day out basis, right? Maybe you're a threat hunter and that's what you do, right? Maybe you're an automation engineer and helping deliver capability to the SOC much faster. Inside of Essentials, you still get a lot of that capability, right? And that's what we have talked about from a ES, right? The ES capability you have is what ES Essentials is. Premier is where we start putting together additional capability inside the platform, inside the tooling, so you have faster access to that. It is feeling more integrated, and it's out of the box versus kind of an add-on experience. Putting it as succinctly as I possibly can here, enterprise security and threat intelligence management, or TIM, and for that are cloud only at this time, are essentially named Essentials. Enterprise security, TIM, SOAR, and UEBA brought together are Premier. I do want to highlight, many of you probably have heard of or use Splunk Security Essentials, or SSE, and ES Essentials is not the same as SSE. So let's talk about as some of the key things from a detection, an investigation, or response portion. And so at the center of everything here, right, are detections. So, right, what's the purpose of a SIM? What is the purpose of this platform if we're not doing anything with the data? So detections are things like pre-built, rule-based, dynamic, and the detections that you and your teams author, right? How are we bringing intelligence into that? Are they integrated and capable with cybersecurity frameworks, right? Most folks are familiar with MITRE ATT&CK as an example. And then how do we make the experience for those detection engineers much better around authoring and management, thinking about things like detections as code? So what does that look like in kind of what we're delivering and have delivered throughout Enterprise Security 8 so far, right? Over 1,700 pre-built detections spanning 225 analytic stories and over 75 playbooks for SOAR. Rule-based detections, right? We kind of think about, hey, how are we taking and looking at rules, right? Event-based detections, what we think of as formally as correlation searches, those risk incident rules. If you're an RBA organization, right, we're morphing those and not modernizing, making them easier to use and finding-based detections. Continue to support adaptive response actions, but then also embracing SOAR playbooks, automation rules, and making sure we have a good capability there. From a dynamic perspective, right, machine learning has been inside of Splunk as a part of MLTK for, like over 10 years at this point, right? We have been embracing AI since the beginning, and now we're layering on additional capability from user and entity behavior analytics, right? Those are dynamic and peer grouping and baselining and that kind of anomaly detection, making RBA even better. And then continued ability to build custom detections. Around threat intelligence enrichment, we've got TIM, we've got the Talos threat intelligence integration, as well as the continued partnership with leading third-party threat intelligence providers. and then making sure that we're not just saying, hey, here's this MITRE ATT&CK framework ID, right? But what does it mean? Where does it fit into a visualization of what's going on? What's our coverage look like? And then and I'll talk through a couple of these features, especially around detection, authoring, and management. Like we're embracing detection versioning and beginning our journey into detections as code, and then supporting continued open source tools. From some of the stuff around detection management, right? We want to make sure that those detection engineers have a really world-class experience and make it much easier for them to reduce noise to the analysts actually as customers of those detections. What does this look like in ES8? We've got event-based detections and we've got finding-based detections. And I'm going to be talking for the next couple of slides through what that differentiation is between an EBD and an FBD. So from an EBD perspective, analysts can choose if a detection outputs a finding or an intermediate finding. And I'll be showing you a graphic here in just a moment what that looks like. Findings are the features of notable events and risk events into a single object, right? So we're no longer just thinking about a finding as a notable event, but it is also bringing risk to the table. These can be one or more anomalous incidents or alerts. And then we're bringing things like metadata, like MITRE ATT&CK TTPs, what's the risk score, and other types of threat objects. Findings are going to be able to be viewed and triaged inside the analyst queue. And these are all either manually created, right? Sometimes, hey, I'm a SOC analyst, part of my job in a past life. I'd take a phone call, I'd take an email. Hey, I think there's something suspicious going on. And so I would go into enterprise security and create a manually created finding. And findings can also represent a group of alerts or just a standalone alert. And it'll make sense a little bit more visually here in a second. Intermediate findings are really where some of the power of Splunk comes in front and center. Intermediate findings are those kind of records of observable behavior. Observable, by the way, being a key term in OCSF. These are things that are like, as a detection engineer or as a threat hunter, like, I think that this is an interesting thing. An intermediate finding might be, hey, I see base 64 encoded PowerShell running on my Windows endpoints. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a security event, but it's interesting, right? There aren't a lot of very genuine use cases of base 64 encoded PowerShell, but that doesn't mean there aren't any genuine valid use cases. So it's a great kind of example of like, I wouldn't want my SOC to immediately triage and investigate that, but I want to make a record of that so that I can then bubble it up through risk and other cool things like finding-based detections. Intermediate findings are not available in the queue to triage, but they can look identical to findings when we are looking at that data in the index. And then, as I mentioned, I think just a moment ago, right, we can bring those into FBDs to really kind of highlight a bubbling up of like, none of these hit this like organic threshold or this solidified threshold, but like combined, it's more than the sum of its parts, and there's probably something going on here. From an ES8 workflow perspective and EBDs, this is that graphic I mentioned, right? We have that event data ingested into Splunk. A detection runs, right? In this case, an event-based detection, and can generate either a finding or an intermediate finding. That finding is going to be triaged by a SOC analyst, and then may actually perform an investigation. That triage may be oh, nope, I know that they're performing maintenance on this host over here. I got that change management ticket. I reviewed it. And so I don't need to perform a full investigation. I can just close this out as an expected behavior. On the intermediate side, right, those detections can record that observation to be used by threat hunters, and then also finding-based detections into the future. As I mentioned, finding-based detections or FBDs, I do want to call out the fact that these were shipped in Enterprise Security 8.0 as a beta feature and continue to be in beta. We're having amazing feedback from our customers and partners, ensuring that we have a really good outcome for everybody, that we understand the nuances of how you use Splunk and you use enterprise security, because even though there's a lot of great Splunkers here, sometimes we don't always know exactly how it's used, and you have our customers are a great source of inspiration. FBDs are very similar to risk incident rules that you may have seen or used in Enterprise Security 7. Those RIRs, we ship with 2 out of the box enabled by default in Enterprise Security 7. There's one around attack behaviors and then risk score. And so those are still EBDs and ES8, but what we are doing there and what you will be doing with FBDs is very similar. So I'm not just saying, hey, if this, then that. It's much more, hey, I want to be looking at this big picture, right? You're bringing together findings, intermediate findings, or even both. And then you're going to take those findings and intermediate findings and output them as a finding group. Those finding groups are what an analyst is going to investigate. So what does that look graphically, right? We are taking findings and intermediate findings, and then that detection that FBD is running and performing that analysis of like an intelligent grouping that you've configured. And then that finding group is what the SOC analyst triages and then perhaps investigates. Detection engineering. I've talked a lot about that. That's kind of one of the things I focus on in my role here at Splunk. Detection versioning is one of those really cool things that we shipped in Enterprise Security 8, and I'm excited of all the feedback and customers taking advantage of this, right? So what we've heard time and time again is that knowledge objects and Splunk, the platform, right? We know those aren't version controlled. There's a lot of tooling that people have created or leveraging APIs, but that doesn't. Sometimes that's not enough, or that's too cumbersome and not enough customers are able to take a use of that. And so the security product team said, hey, how can we help our detection engineers have a better versioning experience? So they're not just like, who updated this and what did they update? And so there are these versioning and content pipelines to build a lifecycle around, right? And this is the beginning. We're not done here, certainly, making sure that we're addressing these use cases. Some key things you can do, right? You can roll back to any version. You have that record. You can see the relationships between major and minor versions and see what was customized. You get that audit log and change history. You can archive content, right? Because detections are a life cycle. It's not just I created this detection. I bet many of you, if you looked, may have detections running for log4j in your environment, and that might not be relevant anymore. And so we want to make sure that people are thinking about how to turn on and turn off and sunset those detections. From a detection diff perspective, right? Anybody that's ever written some code probably has used some kind of diff feature where you're doing line-by-line tracking of changes. And you have a side-by-side view, and you can look at what the difference is between a previous, this version of the detection and a previous version. But then you can also do that with any other detection. And what I think is really cool about that is like sometimes you're like, oh, what did I put in this other detection? Can I just copy and paste? I don't have to flip to like VS Code or some other tool. I can just do it straight from within Enterprise Security 8. Another feature that we've got in beta around detections is the in-editor testing. Right? Anybody who's ever written a detection for a production enterprise security system has probably wished that they could say, hey, when I click save, what's going to happen? Is the SOC going to get flooded with events that they need to go investigate? Or did I do a good job here, right? There's a lot of multiple tabs. You're doing this organically anyway. We wanted to make it inside the detection editor. So the whole outcome there is you really get to see the quick findings and intermediate findings that would be generated, like quick, how many, what's that look like, and over time. The idea there is you can like, oh, I thought this would be a detection that only fires, maybe once a week, and I would be generating 100 every hour. Maybe I need to look at my detection logic. And then it also allows you to give kind of that immediate feedback and look both from a time perspective and then different versions. All right, let's talk about the investigation process. The things that we really focused on with Enterprise Security, and I already kind of stole some of my own thunder here, is around case management. Case management is a key feature for anybody in a security program. Hey, how do I triage and investigate and respond to all of my incidents and events and do it in a much more streamlined manner and not through a bunch of different discrete tools? So we're combining workflows that lead to increased efficiency and better collaboration, hopefully reducing the overall risk picture to your organization, and then hopefully providing that clear audit trail for enhanced compliance to those regulatory bodies. I used to work for the U.S. federal government, and trust me, a lot of my audit requirements were such a pain. But if I could just say, "Hey, this is what we did when this happened," and I could prove the timeline and everything like that, they would usually go find somebody else to hassle. And I'll just take a moment here, and I've used some key words, but haven't really explained how we, Splunk, and our product owners and managers have been thinking about this. Triage, investigate, and respond. There are kind of a three-phased approach, right? You're going to be looking at a triage phase. Hey, is this something I need to be paying attention to now? It's like when you look at your inbox, your Slack unreads, who is it? Is it your boss, Lily, right? Is it your coworker, Brandon? Oh, wait, is this the VIP that you flagged? Wait, do I need to respond to this immediately? Is it from a, is this like a mass mailer that I don't really care about, I can worry about later, right? Those are those kind of triage steps that we do, and we've defined workflow around that in Enterprise Security 8. Investigations, when you open up that email, when you open up that alert and say, hey, I now need to start doing things on this. I need to start recording my observations. I need to perform additional searches. I might need to bring in other collaborators on this investigation. And throughout my investigation, I'm going to be responding to things. And that's where we're bringing in that native SOAR integration and mission control response plans. So what does this look like? Right? So some things that Analyst Q is completely redone. So there's going to be some new features and look and all that stuff. And we'll be showing some screenshots throughout here. But things like saved views, like how can I quickly get to the investigations or findings assigned to me? What about the inbox, right? I work on a team of 10 people during the day. How do I know what is unassigned versus assigned? And then being able to build business specific, organization specific saved views. You'll see findings and investigations in the same table, right? In the same queue you get to look at, and you can filter on those and say, oh, I'm not working on any investigations. I'm going to go look at the findings and start triaging those before I upgrade them into an investigation. From a findings perspective, when you click on a finding, a side panel will come out from the right, and that's where you can start looking at some of that more specific information. Similar to how in Enterprise Security 7, you would expand it and it would open up below the finding. And now it's coming out from the side, and where you're going to start to see a bunch of information that should be familiar to you. Things like who's the owner of this investigation or finding, what's the status and disposition, right? This is where you can make those changes to assign it and workflow, and then the metadata and information about that finding. So say you do choose to take that finding, you can then also start an investigation from there. A quick moment on dispositions, and this is a call out from a former SOC leader to SOC analysts on behalf of your detection engineers and your security engineers. Closing out and highlighting when you are doing the triage investigation process and saying, hey, this is closed and it's a false positive versus a true positive or a benign positive. The power of dispositions is then continuing to feed feedback into the detection engineering lifecycle, so that rather than always complaining, man, this detection always fires, just close it and move on about your day. By assigning things like disposition, you're giving that feedback. So when somebody goes, looks and say, what should I go improve for the SOC today? They can go say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, but there are like 1,000 findings that all got closed out as false positives with incorrect analytic logic. That can help prioritize that work for the detection engineer. Across, when you do open an investigation, there are going to be multiple tabs across the top, right? The overview is pretty much what it sounds like. Response is where we're going to be using phases and tasks and assigned business processes to how this particular type of event should be investigated. Events are where we can add raw Splunk events, providing kind of that link between the data and the investigation. Search allows you to run and perform searches inside the context of an investigation, so you're not flipping between a bunch of tabs and browser windows. Automation is where we're going and looking and seeing, hey, what SOAR actions have run? What is the output of that information? And saying, oh, hey, well, maybe I can go run this, or maybe I want to drill into this and pull this other finding in. And then intelligence is where we're pulling together that threat intelligence management capability, looking at enrichment from things like Cisco Talos. Some things that you'll see on the investigation page. You're going to see those events. You're going to see the findings, MITRE attack map front and center, right? There's also the intermediate finding timeline. You should probably familiar with that. We've brought that into, right? You don't have to click into yet another thing to go see it. It's right there in front of you, making it a little bit easier with some key details about the type of entity or findings in front of you. The capability you should be familiar with, hopefully, things like drill down searches and dashboards, adaptive response, those continue to be front and center and capable from an investigation. You can do these things and create custom and additional fields to add business, right? I need to say, hey, this is the link to this knowledge base article or some other use case where you want to tie a specific bit of information that's not in that raw event and not from a lookup or other enrichment into the investigation. And then you can also see an at-a-glance view of intelligence. One feature that we're really excited about that folks probably need to be thinking about how they're going to use and start creating business rules around as they embrace enterprise security are notes. Notes are ability, you can do that from a finding or an investigation level. You can also do it as a part of a response plan. These notes are markdown formatable, if formatable is a word. Right, you can do things like add code blocks, tables, and here's what I'm super excited about. And this is what, if I was doing a demo, I think I'd get at least one person clapping in the audience. You can literally take a screenshot, paste it in, and it's going to render inside the note. And that's a huge, huge thing. You can also upload files and mark those files as accessible to source, so then automation and playbooks can run against them. And obviously, you can delete those files. I mentioned response plans being the codification of those business processes into a key set of steps. Response plans can have phases, and those phases will have tasks. A task might be something like run this Splunk search or run this playbook. A task can also be something completely outside of Splunk that we want to make sure that we're always doing. Part of my incident response processes before I joined Splunk were to pick up a phone and call somebody. And that's not something that I always remember to do. And so putting that as a part of my response plan as one of the tasks in the initial phase, right, reminds me, making sure that I'm letting the boss know that something bad's going on, that we're performing an investigation. Investigation types allow us to build out really useful automation and a response plan capability. What happens when this type of detection fires? That, as I mentioned, feeds from like hey, this is a malware investigation, which then automatically assigns the suspected malware investigation. Right, and then we're also able to take the search results, as I mentioned, and then add them into the investigation. So now they show up on the events tab. So you can go, hey, what was I looking at? What was this interesting log I found? Right, you don't have to go back and go to the search history and say, what was the search I ran? You can just do that from within the Search Console. Let's talk a little bit about Threat Intelligence Management, or TIM. In the side panel that comes up from findings and investigations, you're going to see when you are a cloud customer with TIM operating on your cloud stack, things like threat actors, malware, and MITRE ATT&CK TTPs, and as well as CVEs about the finding or investigation. Right, there's this metadata that are marked as these observables, and then able to see at a glance what's associated there. For more additional information, you can drill into the intelligence tab, where you can start looking and say, hey, what's the score of this? What report did I see it from? What's the observable type? And what are the tags being brought from my various intelligence providers? What are the scores, and what did they say the score was versus what do I think based on how I workflow with that threat intelligence provider? Also super exciting, and many customers have been asking for this for a very long time. And this is outside of threat intelligence management for our on-prem customers that are super excited about this. There is a Taxi2 client inside the threat intelligence framework. So if you've got a internal feed, maybe from an ISAC or for some other internal organization, especially for our federal government customers worldwide, a lot of those are Taxi2 based. And so you can add those right in and get that valuable content. And now I get to have Brandon speak so I can take a drink. Brandon, what are you ready to talk about?
Oh, I am all sorts of ready to talk about response. So for us, when we talk about response, this means taking that investigation you have and really kind of digging into it, right? Doing further investigation, perhaps doing mitigations, putting controls into place. And for us, a really big part of this is basically bringing SOAR into the picture: automation, security orchestration, automation, and response. And one reason I'm so excited to talk about this, the reason Drew volunteered me for this, is because I actually came over from Phantom, right? The company that made Phantom, which turned into Splunk SOAR, which is now really heavily integrated as part of our response capability. The real short version-ish of this is that Splunk SOAR, Phantom, and Splunk Enterprise Security always had a pretty tight technical integration, but people always had to wonder, where should I do my work, right? Should I live in Splunk SOAR? Should I live in Splunk Enterprise Security? And with ES8, that's no longer a question people need to ask, because what we've introduced is the ability for you to really go ahead and pair them, and not the integration as it used to work, but really make one single work surface. And this is a thing that you can now do in a pretty simple click, right? Whether you are a user in cloud, whether you are a user on-prem, wherever it may be, you have the ability to go ahead and pair. And what that will do is bring Splunk SOAR into your ES8 investigation universe. This is going to bring you a few things. Right, one, it's going to completely change the way that you get to interact with enterprise security from Splunk SOAR. One of the things that you see here is that we have a whole new dedicated enterprise security playbook type. And that works pretty similar to the playbooks that you already have access to today. But what this also does is purpose made to work with Enterprise Security 8. So don't be concerned, right? Nothing that you have is going away. But what this is doing is giving you a whole new playbook type that has all sorts of built-in ES data path, as an example, right? It's able to be run automatically straight from Enterprise Security 8. And part of what comes with these new pairing experience is the ES connector for SOAR. So for any of the playbook developers, automation developers out there, you may be used to using the Splunk app on SOAR. Right? You have the ability to run queries, you have the ability to push data back, and through that you built whatever it was that you needed. Well, as Drew just showed us, we've kind of completely redone the way that you have the ability to do investigations within Enterprise Security 8. And this brand new ES connector for SOAR exposes all of that to you as an automation developer. Right? You can see some of the examples of things that you can automate from here, but really the big thing to realize is that just about anything you can do from the Enterprise Security Investigation UI, you can now do from a Splunk SOAR playbook natively using this block, which is really, really cool. Another big thing here is the addition of the automation rules framework, right? For those of you who might be SOAR developers out there today, automation developers, you might think of the word labels or playbook, dispatch playbooks, right? A way to say, hey, here's a type of detection and here's what playbooks I should run in response. Well, we've given you a brand new, much simpler way to do that as of Enterprise Security 8, leveraging the automation rules framework. The short version of this, and I can go on much longer, and I'm happy to if anybody has questions about it, is that this is basically a many-to-many junction for detections and playbooks. You have the ability to say, hey, look, when any of these given detection types fire these given playbook types. And with that new tight integration, this functionality knows what detections you have, it knows what playbooks you have, and it is a really easy way to pair them. One-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, or many-to-many. It's a really cool way of being able to automatically respond to those detections that you have when they come in. In addition, we of course have that automation history right from Enterprise Security 8. Again, people used to kind of wonder, should my analysts live in Enterprise Security? Should they live in Splunk SOAR? Where should they be doing their investigations? The answer now is that you get both of them right here in Enterprise Security. Drew already spoke about response plans, right? And here we can also see the automation that has already been run, whether automatically, whether manually, as well as give you the ability to go ahead and run additional automation yourself. And with that, Drew's taken a couple of sips of whatever that drink is, and I'll throw it back over to him to cover user entity behavior analytics.
It's water in a very lovely burnt orange water bottle that I got from a warranty replacement. So that all being said,
I'm currently on Coke Zero, caffeine free, but back to you.
Oh, I could go for a Coke Zero right now, Brandon. All right, so let's talk about UEBA, or User Entity Behavior Analytics. I want to highlight that UEBA is not a product. UEBA is a feature of Enterprise Security Premier. It's also not UBA, formerly known as Caspida, for those of you who are maybe familiar with Splunk's legacy of acquisitions. It's not a standalone product, right? And that is going to be a feature that is launched as part of ES Premier only. There's some nuance there. And if you've got questions about that, that's probably something outside of what we're going to be able to cover here in more detail on the webinar today. Please reach out to your account and customer success teams. They've got a bunch of information. If they don't have the information because you got a really great question that stumped them, they have a lot of resources behind the scenes to make sure that you get those answers, those questions answered. One thing to note is there's not going to be any migration or data from the old UBA to UEBA inside of ES Premier. But what's really exciting is that UEBA is going to be delivered capabilities inside of both our Premier Cloud and if you choose to run ES Premier on your own infrastructure in what we call internally as CMP, Customer Managed Platform. Some of the UEBA detection types, right? We've got ML models, so things like a rare VPN login location. We've got anomaly rules, right? So, hey, somebody logging in outside a normal time baseline. Streaming rules, so, hey, we see this DNS lookup using NS lookup. And those are all contained when enabled via ES Premier inside of Enterprise Security. So it's not a second app or anything like that. It's represented all through in Enterprise Security. UEBA brings in some additional dashboarding and workflow for those types of insider threat as well as anomaly detection use cases. You can go look at the riskiest users and assets. You can kind of drill into those. And then there's this whole really cool feature that we're bringing to all customers inside of enterprise security called entity risk scoring. That ERS is a key one of the key inputs to ERS is UEBA detections, but it will be available. The ERS itself will be available in Enterprise Security 8 in a soon-to-be released version. When we think about what is UEBA doing for us, right? It's very user and asset, collectively kind of entity-based and centric analysis, right? So we're looking at dashboards on users and assets, looking at their behavior. We're bringing together, hey, what are the connections between an asset and a user, and processes and traffic, things like that. As I mentioned, the entity risk score or ERS, and that's all feeding in and provides input into a now 0 to 100 bounded risk score that's weighted in a number of different ways and very explainable. And the docs will talk you through that. And then there's also kind of a, hey, what are the MITRE ATT&CK? That's the heat map of the mappings between the detections and the behavior seen across the timeline. So you kind of see, hey, are we hitting some key things that we need to bubble up? UEBA is centered around baselines and anomalies, right? So to identify an anomaly, you have to have kind of a baseline. Drew going, I work out of my home in Washington, the state, not Washington, the district. And I work a lot from here. But just a couple of weeks ago, I was in the former Splunk headquarters down in Santana Row in San Jose. And I logged in on my corporate laptop from there. That is probably outside of baseline behavior and would have been an anomaly, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that's a risk and something needs to be investigated, but it would hopefully flag in UEBA. The idea there is, hey, as you're drilling in thinking about this from rather a detection standpoint, but rather saying, hey, I maybe need to look at Drew because he's suspicious. He said that thing on the call. I'm a little worried about him. So kind of think insider threat. It's not only about insider threat, but a lot of insider threat use cases. And with that, we're going to kind of transition away from some of the key features and big things and to be thinking about as you transition in what it was in ES 7 to ES 8, and talk about things that are around upgrades. Going to be talking about, hey, what are some smart things to do? What are some lessons learned? Some really important things that, especially if you are kind of a Splunk administrator, a security engineer, this is a lot of stuff for you. There's going to be less stuff about using enterprise security to do things like threat detection, investigation, and response throughout the remaining portion of the presentation here today. Nuance is everywhere. So there's probably going to be a bunch of questions, and does this apply to me, not apply to me? I will call out as I'm working through the slides as much as possible, but I will just highlight when I can things that are for our cloud customers versus our on-prem BYOL CMP customers. For example, if you are a cloud customer, one of the things I would highly recommend you do and make a standard process every quarter, maybe every month even, is reviewing the operational contacts on your stack. This is really critical as it applies to Enterprise Security 8, because what we've found is a lot of folks don't do that. And so the person that gets the maintenance window saying, hey, we're going to be upgrading your Enterprise Security to ES 8 is maybe somebody in accounting or in the accounts receivable shop, or maybe is a purchasing org. Like nobody. The ship to contact on the contract is the person getting maintenance window notices, and they're not in the SOC. They don't know anything about what's going on. So definitely recommend that you take advantage of that. And for our on-prem customers, always reviewing your support entitlements and making sure the right people are on that, especially as people change jobs and retire and all that good stuff. For our on-prem or BYOL customers, want to make sure you take a backup, just like the release notes always say. And if you do happen to have a test environment or dev environment, definitely take a look and see how your workflows change. Nothing should break, but there's entirely possible that there's some customizations or enhancements you've done on top of the platform that we've been providing that maybe need a little modification or tweak. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you make bookmarks out of the release notes and the installation upgrade documentation. If you haven't been to our documentation in a while, all of the Enterprise Security 8 documentation for the versions that should be available upon Splunk base or will be delivered to you in the cloud are all on help.splunk.com, not on docs.splunk.com. little bit of a navigation change, but there's a bunch of great information in there. One thing that happens sometimes with ES upgrades is we update the navigation, right? We're doing additional capabilities. We introduce a new dashboard or a new view into something, and we have to upgrade the navigation menu. And so here, if you have a custom nav bar, you're going to want to make sure that you re-customize that following the upgrade. There's a process post the actual installer that you can follow when you're logging in past that upgrade, but definitely something to be thinking about. One thing I want to call out, if you happen to be one of our customers using the investigations features in 7.3 and older, think about investigation workbench. Those customers that actively use that probably want to go to Enterprise Security 8.3 coming very, very soon, because there's going to be a feature in there where it allows you to have not just read access, but you can close out existing investigations and have the ability to review those, export them, and kind of have that compliance look. Frankly, not a ton of customers use this feature, so this may not apply to you, and you're only going to see this view in 8.3 if you have an investigation. That is in the spirit of transparency, something in a future version of Enterprise Security. One thing that most customers don't know, and we get a lot of support cases about from our on-prem customers, there is a TA called Splunk TA for indexers that's called out in the upgrade manual for Enterprise Security. And as a part of what we're doing in ES8, there are some new indexes. So make sure you check the docs and get that TA pushed out in the right parts of your architecture. Existing SOAR playbooks that want to interact and work with the new ES block are going to need to have some updates made. And another note here is that if you saw us talk about the automation rules in Enterprise Security, and those can only be used with the ES type playbooks in your SOAR environment, not regular SOAR or input blocks. Some things to call out from a deprecated or removed feature perspective. I'm going to kind of fly through some of these. Some of them are more, and some of them are maybe less critical to you. You're no longer expanding rows in incident review, right? We talked about the side panel. We showed off the side panel. That's where you're going to be finding information on findings and investigations, right? So it's no longer just going to expand down. It's going to come fly in from the side, or when you go into an investigation, the view is going to look a little differently. There are some enhanced workflow things that you may be able to configure inside of Enterprise Security 7.3. Those settings have all been replaced and look and feel different inside the analyst queue in ES8. If you were looking at the investigation workbench, I mentioned that the bar, right, the thing at the bottom, and that dashboard, as well as the overall workbench feature itself, those were all replaced by the analyst queue mission control UI. Sequence templates are no longer something you can edit, and they are only read-only. And we've been putting some deprecation warnings in releases, and we finally did pull it out in ES 8.0. If you were using the standalone mission control app, there are some things that haven't quite made it into Enterprise Security 8 yet. So service level agreements and some role-based incident type filtering are not currently available. If you are one of the customers who also took advantage of the BR SOAR instances as a part of the standalone mission control app, if you're using that, you probably already know it. But in case somehow you have not heard from somebody, those instances are not supported by Enterprise Security 8. And if you, as a part of that, we've been doing a bunch of outreach, but in case we somehow miss somebody, please, we're working with you, and reach out to your account team, and we'll make sure that we get a white glove experience to have that migration happen. As I mentioned before, comments and our notable events are no longer available. The comments feature is replaced by notes. I will also note and highlight to you that there are some macros and other things that you may be using under the hood in custom reports and dashboards where, hey, I would like to pull in some of this note information. It's a different paradigm. It's not a one-to-one feature, so there's some work that you may need to do there as well. We've provided some tools to help with that, and I'll be talking about the REST API towards the end of the deck here that we're reaching shortly. Some limitations just to be aware of as you think about how you're going to be embracing the new features in Enterprise Security 8 and maybe some of the workflow changes you need to make. Adaptive response actions are still a core part of Enterprise Security, and that's how a lot of things work under the hood. But you are not able to run adaptive response actions on investigations. There is a little triple dot menu when you're looking at a finding, and you can run those adaptive response actions from a finding, just like you can in Enterprise Security 7.3. I highlighted this already, but just want to call it out. Finding base detections are a beta feature. The documentation explains what that beta feature is and understand supportability and where we're looking for feedback. There is a voice of the customer portal, voc.splunk.com. And there is an finding base detections call out on there if you want to provide feedback. We'd love to hear it. We want to know what's working, what's not working. Very much appreciate customer user feedback. And one thing, if you are a SOAR on-prem customer and you have the multi-tenancy feature enabled on your SOAR instance, pairing that and Enterprise Security 8 in the native converged experience will no longer work. The adaptive response based and the way you may be pulling SOAR cases and between the two apps in the Splunk app for SOAR and Splunk app for SOAR export, that will continue to work, but the converged experience does not support SOAR on-prem multi-tenancy. I'm going to talk about a couple of high-level known issues. The docs are your best friend if you're looking for this. And the link is there, and you can go to help.splunk.com and get to those release notes pretty quickly. There are some interesting things around how the diff editor works. If you're in an air-gapped or like very browser-restricted, internet-restricted environment, there may be some weird oddity behavior. There's a fix coming for that very soon. Sometimes FBD, similar firing type, does not create a one-to-one, and there's more details in the docs. Finding FBDs are still in beta, and we're still getting some of the nuance out there. Fix coming soon. There is, as a part of the migration from the Splunk docs site, docs.splunk.com to help.splunk.com, there are URLs that we're continuously trying to get updated and find, and sometimes redirects don't work the way we thought they were, and so it's an ever-evolving thing. So if you're trying to click on a documentation link in Enterprise Security 8 and are not getting what you want, I would just recommend going to help.splunk.com, go to Enterprise Security 8, select the version, and then go into the appropriate manual in the section there. Do apologize for that. We're working on that, but it's a moving target. One thing I will talk about, and I'll be going to a slide here in a second, is just existing detections are going to run without issue. So when you are a 7.3 customer and you upgrade to Enterprise Security 8, the version that you happen to pick, right, your detections are going to continue to run, right? The description and risk message are going to be there. But if you aren't using some of those features, there is some stuff that we are kind of just saying, hey, these were kind of optional before, but now these are kind of key things that we think and we believe in this kind of workflow should be followed, and kind of being a little more prescriptive, which is, again, some feedback we continue to get customers like, rather than give us a box of parts, tell us exactly how to do it. And so there are some things that you will need to be aware of when you're editing and updating detections. Make sure that you know that. So there are just, if you like, hey, doing some sprint planning, right, because that's how you do your detection engineering workflow, maybe add a few extra story points or whatever to kind of get familiar with some of these changes, because you may need to make more updates than you were thinking about, but the detections will continue to fire, right? So it's when you go to make an update that there may be some additional work. So there's no, post upgrade, I'm not covered. That's not how that works. All right, and this is a really, I'm going to do my very best to explain if risk event time changes. Not a super eye chart, and it looks like it's still legible on the screen, but I'm going to kind of walk through what a risk event, right? So those are the risk adaptive response actions, and they get written to the index equals risk, right? So that's the thing I'm talking about here. In 7.3, the way that works is something happens, and that's what we have as the event time, and then there is an index time. Right, so the event happens and there's an index time, and usually time is set to the event time, and then there's that underscore index time that you can get access if you do this fun eval thing. And then there's a risk rule, right? So that says, hey, you're going to go look at the risk index and then bubble some stuff up. And what happens is the risk event is created at the search time that adds when it gets added to the risk index versus the event time versus the index time. And then you can see on the slide there, right, where orig time is set to the time in the search results, right? So coming back from like the event time. In 8.x, right, there's a slight difference where we are looking and saying, hey, if the time is set to the value in the search results, if it exists. If there isn't that time value in certain circumstances, it's the current time when it's written to the disk. And essentially, it's the opposite of how it kind of works. This should not matter to most customers, and we've had very few problems, but just it's something that we want to call out. This slide's available in the deck, and this change is documented inside of Docs. So I'm going to pause here. There's at least one person's probably taking a screenshot if they haven't already. Going to vamp, and I see Brandon sent me a very lovely note. All right, and I think we are almost done. So let's talk real quick before we move into the live Q&A, which we have a couple of minutes for. REST API support. There is, we have done a lot of work in putting a bunch of information into various bits and bobs inside of enterprise security. When you just strip back enterprise security, it's running on top of a couple of things, right? You've got the index, you've got KV store collections, right? If you're a KV service customer, right? Technically KV service collection, but KV store, right? So we kind of have the immutable index where it can't be changed. And then where we need to do things like, create, read, update, delete type actions that you do with like workflow, right? So when you set a status somewhere, right? The kind of place that's going to live is in a KV store collection. And so there's a lot of work that's gone on there. And so some nuance about how you have access to these things. There are search macros and KV store collections. Well, we do not currently advise customers that need to go kind of mine that information for third-party tool workflows or some kind of reporting and dashboarding. Going into those, we continue to make changes and continue to improve. And so you may end up kind of be running into this. You're always trying to keep updating your customizations and enhancements on top of that. And so as a part of that, we introduced a RESTful API for ES. The docs are very, there's an open API spec file. The docs are pretty good on here. Here's what this call needs to look like. Here is the expected response, right? So you can download that open API spec and go use something like a Postman or another tool to help understand what you're doing there. The list of supported functions in 8.1 and 8.2 are here. There continue to be investments in making more of these functions work. If it is a thing that you're doing a kind of a get action from, those are supported using the pipe REST command inside of SPL. So things like, hey, I need to get a list of findings, you can run that from a pipe REST call. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move into a live Q&A. Brandon, did you have something you want to call out specifically?
I'll take from the top. Awesome. We've answered most of the questions in chat. I see there's one or two there we will try to get to as well. But one question I did want to go ahead and address is, if I hit push, does this bring us to, yeah, okay, everybody should see the ES8 workflow event-based detections. So one thing I wanted to take a moment to address quickly is someone in the Q&A pod said, hey, look, I've been on a couple of these presentations before. You're learning about Splunk Enterprise Security. One thing I've heard about is RBA, risk-based alerting. Does that play into this finding-based system? So one thing I will say, if you've never heard of RBA and you are a Splunk Enterprise Security user, you should absolutely reach out to your account team to learn a bit more about it. It's not a product. It's not something you pay for. It's just a really cool way of using enterprise security. The 10-second version of it is that rather than having every single thing that you detect become a notable event in ES7 below or a finding in ES8 and later, you have the ability to say, hey, look, still run this detection, still run this correlation search, but instead of making an alert in the queue, go ahead and just stash this in an index so I can use it as telemetry for further detections. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look at this slide real quick. Here, looking at a detection, you can say, hey, look, I found a thing. Either A, it needs to tell my analysts immediately, or B, this is not bad enough for an alert. Put it in my pocket so I can then assess that risk index later to make what are basically meta detections. I like to use the phrase turning detections into further telemetry. So the question here was, how does RBA, which is what I just described, play into all this new stuff in Enterprise Security 8? And it is kind of a direct evolution, right? It's the same way, it's using that same system, but making it more ingrained into the product than ever before. So as you can see here, when you have detection on an event-based detection, when you actually go ahead and find something, you can say, hey, look, make it a finding, put it in my analyst queue, or you can say make it an intermediate finding, which is exactly something that should sound very familiar to those of us leveraging RBA. And then later on, if I skip down to the findings-based detections that Drew mentioned in that preview functionality, here we have the ability to make basically meta detections using existing findings that showed up in the analyst queue, as well as those intermediate findings that we turned into telemetry rather than alerts. very quick version of that, again, if you are an ES user today and not using RBA or not familiar with it, you really should talk to your account team. It's a pretty cool thing to see. And again, not something that's like a product for sale. It's just a way to use ES. A second very important question was, are there screenshots of all of this in dark mode? To which I replied, light mode is the new dark mode. But if you disagree, we don't have screenshots for you in the presentation, but you can, of course, use this in dark mode. Drew, was there anything that you wanted to tackle in the next?
I did, and I think there's a super important question to call out here. The question is, what are the timelines for migrating to Enterprise Security 8 and it being mandatory? Some things I would like to highlight. Enterprise Security 7.3 had a support extension for its end of support date to February 28, 2026. You can see that update in our Splunk support policy documentation on splunk.com. Obviously, if you run your own infrastructure, right? So you have your CMP install, you have a license, right? A term-based contract with Splunk. You are in control of your own destiny. You can choose to run past end-of-life software. So that's kind of up to you, but the end of support date is February 28, 2026. For our cloud customers, we have been upgrading, and there are many cloud customers that have embraced Enterprise Security 8, but we've been letting our customers say, hey, we know and we've seen these changes, we want this upgrade. In a release of Enterprise Security 8 here shortly, we are going to be starting to go into a normal upgrade routine following our release management cloud train processes that are more in line with traditional SaaS and how we do things at Splunk. And so that's coming in soon. If you have questions, concerns about timing and all of that, right? Obviously, if you get a maintenance window notification, there's instructions in there on how to say, hey, we need to hold off on this or whatever. Follow those instructions. If you'd like to be proactive, I suggest you reach out to your account or customer success teams and say, hey, I listened to Drew talk for way too long. We talked about ES8 and I have some questions, and we can start helping and making sure you get the support you need for the time that you have. I know we are at time, and there's a couple of other questions coming in, and I'll answer a couple, and then we'll shut it down. So there's a question about the availability for ES Premier. The ES Premier timeline is it is in currently controlled availability, and will be generally available following the release of Enterprise Security 8.3. Is the new UEBA component on Premier does it still require a separate UBA infrastructure or replace it? UEBA and UBA are not the same thing. UEBA is a feature of enterprise security. Depending on how you choose to implement UEBA, whether it is in the cloud or CMP, right? If you're a Splunk Cloud customer, you'll be using the cloud-based version, and we're going to handle a lot of that. The new UEBA CMP features are largely Splunk-based, so you're going to be using existing infrastructure, but obviously when you start running additional search and whatnot, there may be considerations. So that's definitely a question if you're interested in to reach out to your account team and get a little deeper dive on that. The docs will be available when the solution becomes generally available. And with that, I think we are out of time, and we're going to go ahead and close it down. I just want to say thank everyone so much for spending a little over an hour with us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you again next time.
Drew, if I can take 5 seconds before we hang up, there was one question. I know we're over. It's just, I think, pretty urgent. Someone said, hey, look, if we're using RBA today, is that automatically turned into findings-based detections and such now in preview? No, you can continue to use your existing RBA implementation exactly as it is. Yeah, that's the end of the question. So no, you do not go from production to preview or beta if you're leveraging RBA. You can continue to use it.
Thanks for calling that out. That's very important.
I feel like that was a big one to answer. I'll throw it back over to you to, I guess, finish wrapping up.
Yeah, and I think our partner behind the scenes, I'd have no idea how to end the webinar. I should have asked.
Thank you, Drew.